people left to their own devices, just the default, is they don't have very high standards of accuracy. People are happy with myths and conspiracy theories and legends and stories that make their side look good and the other side look bad. When legacy media were new, when there was first cheap newspapers, all the news was fake news. It would take the equivalent of 30 million years for a child to process as much information as GPT is trained on. And the child can speak fluently in 3 years, not 30 million years.
Olá, o meu nome é José Maria Pimentel e este é o 45 Graus. Duas notas rápidas antes de irmos ao episódio de hoje. Como alguns de vocês sabem, começa em meados de maio a segunda edição da pós-graduação em pensamento crítico e tomada de decisão no ISCTE Executive Education. Se tiverem curiosidade, enfim, procurem online e vão chegar à pós-graduação. A segunda nota é que estreou há poucas semanas o Debatível, um projeto que alguns de vocês também conhecerão, que foi um projeto criado por mim, juntamente com a Leonor Caldeira e o João Marecos. São debates ao vivo, debates competitivos entre duas equipas em torno de uma moção. Segue um chamado modelo tipo Oxford e combina competição com entretenimento. São debates muito desafiantes de assistir. O primeiro foi há 2 ou 3 semanas sobre o impacto da inteligência artificial no mundo do trabalho. O segundo vai ser já em maio, sobre o sistema prisional. E o terceiro vai ser em junho e é sobre a crise do jornalismo e se a solução para essa situação é o Estado apoiar diretamente o jornalismo. Uma proposta que já anda por aí há muitos anos, não vai desaparecer e que gera opiniões muito diferentes. Os bilhetes para o segundo debate já estão esgotados, mas conseguem ainda encontrar para este terceiro debate em junho na Ticketline e, como se costuma dizer, nos locais habituais. E agora ao episódio de hoje. O convidado é alguém que tenho muito orgulho de conseguir trazer ao 45 Graus. É ele, Steven Pinker, um dos meus autores preferidos e uma pessoa que já estava a tentar trazer ao podcast há muito tempo. Para quem não sabe, Steven Pinker é psicólogo cognitivo, linguista e um dos mais influentes intelectuais públicos dos Estados Unidos. É professor na Universidade de Harvard e destacou-se pelo trabalho sobre a linguagem, mente humana e natureza humana e, mais recentemente, daí o intelectual público, por tomar partido em vários debates, sobretudo a defesa do que ele chama os valores do Iluminismo, como a razão, a ciência e o progresso. É autor de vários livros best-sellers e lançou recentemente um livro que acaba de ser editado em português com o título Quando Todos Sabem que Todos Sabem. Reticências. É exatamente com este livro que abrimos a nossa conversa. O tema do livro é aquilo que o convidado chama conhecimento comum, ou seja, aquilo que todos nós sabemos que os outros sabem e eles sabem que nós sabemos. E isso, como ele explica, é essencial para nós coordenarmos uma série de comportamentos complexos em sociedade, desde conduzir na estrada até confiar nas instituições políticas. Isto leva-nos a outra pergunta, que é o que acontece quando este conhecimento se começa a fragmentar, como tem acontecido em muitos países, em resultado, não só, mas em grande medida, das redes sociais. Perguntei ao convidado a opinião dele sobre isto e o que é que ele acha que pode ser um futuro ecossistema informativo em que nós conseguimos, de certa forma, domar as redes sociais, mas conseguindo continuar também a ter os benefícios que elas nos dão. Falámos também, como não poderia deixar de ser, sobre a inteligência artificial. Perguntei ao convidado se estes novos modelos de linguagem, sobretudo para alguém que é não apenas um psicólogo, mas também um linguista, se o surpreenderam e também, ao mesmo tempo, qual é a posição dele sobre este debate que tem-se tido cada vez mais sobre se estamos a usar estes modelos em demasia e isso está a atrofiar o nosso pensamento crítico. Foi um episódio curto para o que é habitual aqui no 45 Graus, mas como vou ver, é um episódio muito denso em conhecimento. Espero que gostem e voltamos a ver-nos no próximo episódio. Até lá!
O café do teu hotel é incrível.
É Nespresso. Já conheces os planos Soluções Chávena na Mão?
Não, o que inclui?
Escolhes a máquina e o café. O resto tratam eles. Entregas, reciclagem, assistência técnica.
Perfeito para o meu escritório. Café sem complicações.
Nespresso Professional. Soluções Chávena na Mão. O plano de café ideal para o seu negócio. Saiba mais em nespresso.com/pro.
I'm here with Professor Steven Pinker. Steven, welcome ao 45 Graus.
Thank you.
And before we start, let me thank you for making the time. I mean, I know I have to turn down some requests for interview. You get, I imagine, 10 times that. So I really appreciate that you're making the time. Let me start with your new book,
Sure.
which just came out in Portuguese. Tell me a bit about it. It's one of those books which is less self-explanatory than the previous ones, I would say. So it seems to convey an apparently mundane aspect about the importance of common knowledge. But if I know you, I imagine that there's much more underneath that.
Yes, the title in English is When Everyone Knows That Everyone Knows, ... Common Knowledge and the Mysteries of Money, Power, and Everyday Life. So common knowledge is a technical term from mathematical game theory, also used in linguistics, in philosophy, and in economics. And it's distinguished from private knowledge. In private knowledge, I know something and you know it. In common knowledge, I know something and you know it, and I know that you know it, and you know that I know it, and I know that you know that I know it, and so on ad infinitum. That's why there are the three dots. Now, why is this significant? Well, it's because common knowledge is necessary for coordination, for people to be on the same page. That is, to each do something that benefits them as long as the other person does the same thing or a complementary thing.
Yeah.
So if you have a potluck dinner and you want one person to bring the main course and another person to bring the dessert, they need common knowledge. It's not enough to know that that I'm going to bring meat because the other person might think I'm bringing dessert, and so he'll bring meat. Even if I know that he's bringing dessert, he might think that I think that he's bringing meat, and so he'll bring meat after all. Only if each one of us knows that the other one knows that we know can we both do the thing that benefits us both. Now, this applies in many conventions of everyday life. Driving on the right versus driving on the left. There's no reason to do one or the other, but it's very important that everyone drive on the same side, whether it's the right or the left, which they can only do if they know that everyone else knows that that's the side you drive on.
Yeah.
It's responsible for the fact that we can use paper money. Why do I accept a piece of paper in exchange for something of value? Well, because I know that someone else will accept it in exchange for something of value they'll give me. Why do they do that? Because they know that someone else will accept it. And so money has value only because everyone believes that everyone else believes that it has value. And if people stop believing in it, the money can become worthless, as in hyperinflation.
Yeah, exactly. Just
in
like
bank
banks.
runs, where
Exactly.
people withdraw their money from a bank, not even because they think the bank is unsound, but if they worry that other people worry that still other people, everyone might withdraw their money
contagion
because they don't
effect.
want to be the last one. Political power depends on common knowledge. No government can intimidate every last one of its citizens. Citizens can always overrun a government, but only if they all act at the same time. So they all have to know that everyone else is discontent with the government. They all have to know when the time is to rise up and oppose the government. That's why totalitarian governments prohibit freedom of the press, which is a way of generating common knowledge, and freedom of assembly, where people get together and everyone can see everyone else and they know that they're united in their opposition. Finally, a lot of the book is on everyday life, and that's how I came to the concept, because I am a psychologist. I'm interested in what people think, how they interact. So I suggest that a lot of the rituals and hypocrisies and puzzling aspects of everyday life can be understood as ways that we generate and prevent private knowledge from becoming common knowledge. When we use euphemisms and innuendo instead of just saying exactly what we mean, phenomenon of language, which is my primary interest, I suggest it's that sometimes we want to get a message across, but we don't want the other person to know that we know that they know what the message is. And so that's when we say things indirectly or in euphemism, such as in bribes. Gee, officer, is there some way we could settle the traffic ticket here without going to court and doing all that paperwork? Veiled bribe, a veiled threat. Nice story you got there. Would be a real shame if something happened to it from a mafiosi.
Yeah.
Veiled sexual come on. Would you like to come up for Netflix and chill? All of these are ways in which we get our meaning across, but there is deniability as to whether we know that the other person knows that we know that they know the meaning. And so we can preserve our social relationships. Our social relationships are themselves matters of common knowledge. What makes two people friends? Each one knows that the other one knows that the first one knows that the second one knows they're friends. That's what friendship is. Or romance, or a dominant and a subordinate, or two transaction partners. The relationships are held by common knowledge. Anyway, that's a quick overview of my new book.
Yeah, and I find your thesis relevant to a wide range of aspects, but one of them is coordination, as you mentioned in the beginning. And it's interesting to notice that, for instance, let's take the example of traffic. We find that in different countries there are different equilibria, and some are better than others, in the sense that you can have one equilibrium in which the traffic is kind of chaotic, and it sort of works, but it's much better if everyone follows the rules, right? Do you have a view on how these different equilibria emerge? Like, does this inform our view on how different equilibria emerge, be it in the traffic or in social trust, like the trust people have on strangers, for instance, which also varies among countries?
The reason that the branch of mathematics called game theory is relevant is game theory is about situations in which the rational choice depends on what the other person does and vice versa. So you can't just look up which of my decisions will give me the greatest benefit, because it depends on the decisions that the other guy makes. Mm-hmm. So in a situation where you have two people and the outcome for each one depends on the other one, then there's no correct answer often, but there can be an equilibrium. An equilibrium is when one choice, regardless of what the other one does, you're best off sticking with that choice, and so on for the same thing for the other guy. Sometimes called a Nash equilibrium, after the mathematician John Nash, who's the subject of the Hollywood movie A Beautiful Mind. I just call it an equilibrium. Now, a coordination game is when there are two equilibria, both of which work. That is, if both parties make a certain choice, neither one has an incentive to switch their decision based on, as long as the other guy sticks to his. So driving on the right or driving on the left is an example. If everyone else is driving on the left, my best option is to drive on the left, and that's true of every driver.
Mm. But how does it start, right? How do they start? It might be imposed top-down from the government, but otherwise, why would they start driving on the left?
Yes, it's in that case, it's imposed by the government, and sometimes it can switch. In 1969, the government of Sweden decided to, which previously had driven on the left. This was inconvenient for cars driving into Norway and Finland, or taking the ferry across or the bridge to Denmark. And to harmonize with the rest of Europe, they decided to make the switch. The crucial thing is they couldn't just say, well, whenever it's convenient for you, whenever you are ready, make the switch. That would lead to chaos. So they picked a particular day. I think it was December 31st, New Year's Eve, midnight, I think 1969, and everyone switched at the same time. They were prepared for it. Mm. But sometimes equilibria arise even when there is no top-down control, because of the fact that it's as soon as there's an asymmetry, as soon as enough people lean in one direction, everyone leans in that direction, because each new person, it's to their advantage to do what everyone else is doing. And that's how many of our customs arise. That's how words in a language are accepted. Dictionaries don't decide what words mean. Dictionaries listen to the way people use words, and they write down the way everyone is using a word. I know this because I was an editor at an American dictionary. Anyway, in a coordination game, there are two equilibria. If everyone drives on the right, drive on the right. If everyone drives on the left, drive on the left. Or let's take a couple in a situation where, let's say, she prefers to go to the opera, he prefers to go to a hockey game. But they both enjoy each other's company, so they'd rather, whatever it is, do something together than alone. Well, if she's already decided to go to the opera, he's better off going to the opera than the hockey game. If he's already decided to go to the hockey game, she's better off going to the hockey game than going to the opera. There are two equilibria. Both of them can work, and both of them are better than when they are mismatched, one of them going to the opera, the other one going to the hockey game. In that case, either of them can switch and would be better off. But the equilibria are where neither one has an interest in switching. The question is, how do you get into one equilibrium or the other? And a lot of our social life is driven by what attracts us into one of several possible equilibria.
You mentioned society working, and common knowledge is also essential on the political realm, as it were. So for institutions to work and for us to have trust in institutions. And I'm curious to know what you think of the role of social media here, because we are living through a time of, it has been called epistemic fragmentation, right? So there was a basis of common knowledge, I would call it, that we all kind of shared, and now it's more fragmented than ever. How do you see the role of social media here, and the impacts of this destruction of common knowledge?
Well, social media, in theory, work against common knowledge, because in contrast to, say, broadcast media, where everyone can listen to the BBC and know that everyone else is listening to the BBC, everyone can read Time magazine and know that everyone else is reading Time magazine, the social media algorithms deliver a personal feed that you read and you don't know who else is reading it. However, I've done studies with my graduate students that show that for certain aspects of social media, people treat them as if they're common knowledge. If in X there's a trending column, or sometimes a For You column, people feel everyone can be seeing that. And even if, because you can generate common knowledge on social media, not just passively receive it, you never know when a tweet might go viral. One that if you see it and retweet it or repost it in TikTok or Facebook or Instagram, then anything could become common knowledge if it increases exponentially, if it goes viral. And that's even more true now that even the mainstream media will often reproduce a social media post. They'll have a screenshot of a tweet, particularly if it's from some prominent figure, and then it really does become common knowledge.
Well, the words are always polysemic, as you know better than me. So here, in this sense, we can use knowledge in the sense of information. Maybe I'm stretching the concept too much, but I was thinking knowledge in the sense of the sharing of a certain understanding of the democratic process, for instance, or a certain understanding of the values. I think, to use your words, liberal Enlightenment values that support liberal democracies, right? We'll see that waning, and my view, and I think you share it, is that social media has a big role there, right?
Yeah, there it's not so much whether the knowledge is common or not, but whether it is even accepted.
Yeah.
That it's not that the crucial issue with common knowledge is there a case where everyone knows something, but they don't know that everyone knows it? When you're talking about the fact that half the population thinks that in the United States, the 2020 election was stolen and the other half doesn't. There, it's not private versus common. It's common belief in two separate pools of common belief. Which is a whole other set of issues. Yes.
Let me pick your brain on this, because I'm currently writing a book on social media and its impact in politics. And one thing my co-author and I have been thinking about is, what can the future look like? Like, imagining this will not go terribly wrong, and we'll end up with something akin to religious wars of the 16th century, the 17th century, actually. What can the future look like? So in the past, we had, as you mentioned, broadcast. We have basically the gatekeepers of the system, be them news, TV channels, newspapers, whatever, which intermediated information and kept the system sort of working. Now we have this more chaotic environment. Do you foresee an equilibrium in the future, so with different institutions, a different environment, perhaps, in which we are able to sort of preserve the good parts of social media, which it has, and also correct this chaotic and polarizing element?
Yeah, it's a big challenge because basically the people left to their own devices, just the default, is they don't have very high standards of accuracy. People are happy with myths and conspiracy theories and legends and stories that make their side look good and the other side look bad. It's only when you have standards of fact-checking and verification and editing and peer review and freedom of speech, epistemic standards, that we have any chance of finding the truth. These are rare. It happens with science. That was what the scientific revolution was about. It's happened with historical archives, with statistical data sets that typically are kept by government agencies. In the court system, we have the adversarial process of a prosecuting attorney and a defense attorney. But each one of these are very special arenas where we explicitly try to approach the truth, knowing that human beings left by themselves will not seek the truth. They want good stories. Unless you have that, then you're just going to get stories, fake news, conspiracy theories, myths, and so on. Now, when legacy media were new, when there was first cheap newspapers, all the news was fake news. There were stories of babies born talking, speaking Latin, of Martian civilizations, of two-headed monsters pulled out of a lake. They were just in the business of selling propaganda and stories, and until a bunch of editors got together in various countries. They said, this is ridiculous. We have a responsibility to try to tell the truth. Let's adopt standards like fact-checking, editing, separation of the opinion section from the news section, printing corrections, and so on. Likewise, science had scientific societies and journals and peer review. Now, what happens with, it's not just social media, but with the general democratization of media. So instead of having a small number of channels, small just because for technological and economic reasons, there were only a small number of mass market presses. There's only a small amount of bandwidth for every television station. We kind of married the limited number of channels with standards for accuracy and fact-checking. Then it all broke open with not just social media, but even before that, the World Wide Web, individual blogs, listservs and discussion groups, cable news in broadcast media, well, not broadcast, but mass media, AM talk radio stations. They just proliferated. And as with the beginning of the press, they were free from the gatekeepers and mechanisms of quality control. Now, whether people will get fed up with all of the nonsense and fake news and conspiracy theories, because people don't like being lied to, whether there'll be mechanisms such as, we see some of them already, like community notes in X, where people can post a correction, or using AI to fact-check a post. There may be other mechanisms, like people often falsely think that the country is more polarized than it really is. In the United States, Democrats think the Republicans have much more extreme views than a typical Republican has, and vice versa. If you even present people with data, this is the percentage of people who think this and that, it suddenly changes the way they perceive a post, a tweet. And instead of thinking this is what a typical Republican thinks, they know this is just what an extreme Republican thinks. Anyway, those are just some examples of ways in which there may be a pushback, and people, since they don't want to believe nonsense, they don't want to be lied to, there may be some pressure to have higher standards for epistemic accuracy.
So one solution would be maybe on the part of the platforms, be it through regulation or through their own accord, changing the algorithm, Do you see something? You mentioned how the editors got together and coordinated. We are, to use the term again, back in the day. Do you see something akin to that occurring today, in that podcasters, online opinion makers, influencers, whatever, create a sort of a guild, to use an historic term, and sort of agree on some standards? I see that very far away, but it might be a solution. I don't know.
Yes, I mean, you don't necessarily want government coercion, because no one knows what the truth is, including the
Exactly.
government.
Yeah.
You need a marketplace of ideas, and government, unlike podcasters and social media posters, has the police and the army. So there's a particular danger of letting the government legislate truth. It did happen during the pandemic, for example, that some opinions, which we now know are reasonable, such as did the SARS-CoV-2 virus escape from a lab in China? We don't know, but it's certainly possible. But during the pandemic, that was considered to be disinformation, and it was censored from some of the social media platforms. We're better off knowing the truth, and the only way to know the truth is if a variety of opinions can be voiced, as long as they are also evaluated and criticized.
Yeah, exactly. There you go. So it needs to somehow occur bottom up, right, and not top down. So somehow you need to.
Yes.
Yeah, we need to do that. Let me turn to AI. You mentioned AI before, and I'm very curious to know your view on Gen AI, because you are a scholar of the human mind and also a linguist. So AI, I would say, raises your curiosity at least on two levels, right? On its comparison with the human mind, and on the fact
Yes.
that it's using language, and you coming at it as a linguist. How do you view these models? Have their success surprise you?
It did surprise me. I would not have guessed that just increasing the sheer scale of these models, both the amount of input, which is basically the entirety of the World Wide Web,
Yeah.
and the scale of the compute, that is the number of hidden layers between the input and the output, that increased beyond what we can really imagine. The number of parameters, the number of layers, that in combination with the gargantuan amount of input could lead them to something that is in very many ways quite impressive. You can create a limerick explaining Kurt Gödel's famous theorem of incompleteness, and it comes up with a limerick, not perfect, but not bad. I mean, that's smarter than anything a human could do. At least in a couple of minutes, a couple of seconds, really. On the other hand, no one really understands how they work. With a trillion parameters, a lot of the knowledge is smeared in diffuse patterns through the trillion connections, and it's only beginning to see how they come up with the answers they do come up with. And we know that there may be some overlap with how the human mind becomes intelligent. We also process a lot of information from the time we're children. On the other hand, it would take the equivalent of 30 million years for a child to process as much information as GPT is trained on. And the child can speak fluently in 3 years, not 30 million years. We also know that when you train a child, as a child learns language, their utterances aren't like a half-trained large language model. Also, the large language models have a funny combination of brilliance and stupidity. They are subject to hallucinations and blends. They cannot be updated by single facts in real time, but have to be trained on a whole corpus all over again. They make bizarre blends. They have failures sometimes of simple spatial reasoning. If A is above B and B is above C, A must be above C. They don't really have a internal model of the world, of objects and places and people and events, but rather hundreds of billions of statistical associations. I mean, it's amazing how well they do with that. A lot of it thanks to the reinforcement learning from human feedback and the post-training, where they are kind of hammered into standards of relevance and truthfulness and harmlessness.
Yeah.
And there now are calls within the AI community by some of the experts for a new kind of architecture that would have a model of the real world and not just associations between words and other words.
Yeah, exactly. That's exactly where I wanted to get, because that's a common criticism on these models, that they lack a model of the world, as you mentioned. So while they are very powerful pattern recognizers, they don't have a model of the world, and that maybe this is a too rough an analogy, but that reminds me a bit of the distinction between System 1 and System 2 of our brain, so from Daniel Kahneman and Amos Tversky. And it almost seems to me that, in a sense, these models lack a System 2, so they don't have a model of the world, but they have the most powerful System 1 we've ever seen. So they are, because our System 1 of our brain is in itself also a pattern recognizer, right? It's sort of how it works. And these models, they do that on steroids, basically, because they are much more powerful. Yeah. And they have, as you mentioned, was it 30 million years of data?
Yes, yeah. Well, it depends on the model.
Yeah.
And often we don't know because it's proprietary.
Yeah. Anyway, it exceeds our intuition, right? So it's way beyond. But is this? Do you agree with this? Or is this a too rough an analogy?
There's something to that. One way of thinking about it is, in any computation, there's an input and then there's an output. And in the first neural network models, every input was connected to every output. Turns out those models were pretty stupid. They just couldn't really learn anything of interest. Then in the 1980s, there was the brilliant idea of a hidden layer between the input and the output, so it could have abstract concepts, not just stimulus response. The breakthrough, and Geoffrey Hinton won a Nobel Prize for this, was figuring out how to train the hidden layer, because the hidden layer did not actually interface with the real world. So there was no easy way of training it with the correct connections. Mm-hmm. So Hinton and his collaborators came up with an algorithm for training layers that had abstract concepts, one layer of abstract concepts, called error backpropagation. Now that was smarter, but it was still often there's a limit as to what they could do. Then they said, well, let's try 2 hidden layers. Let's try 5 hidden layers. Let's try 100 hidden layers. Now you might think 100 hidden layers, you'd have to backpropagate the error signal, getting more and more diluted with every step. That can't possibly work. But what we now know is, with hundreds of billions or trillions of examples, not exactly could work all the time, but can be very impressive. So it is kind of a System 1 on steroids. It isn't at least designed to do step-by-step reasoning, to do logic, to do algorithms, but it's got so many abstractions at such a high level that it is coming very close, and in some ways can deliver answers that step-by-step reasoning could not deliver.
Yeah, and we've all have that experience. I'll ask you one final question, because I know you're pressed on time, and take your time to respond. I teach critical thinking, so the connection between AI and critical thinking is very important to me. And as you know, there's been a whole lot of talk about reliance on these models leading to so-called cognitive offloading, right? So that we tend to offload our thought process to these models and thereby shrink, I would say, or atrophy our critical thinking. Do you agree with this? And do you have any recommendations for people to use these models without these side effects?
In some ways, this reminds me of a debate that took place when I was a college student more than 50 years ago, because then the innovation was handheld calculators.
Yeah, of course.
The question is, when you had a calculator and you could put in an arithmetic problem and it would come up with the answer, will our arithmetic abilities atrophy so no one will be able to multiply 7 times 9 anymore? So a couple of things. One of them is, calculators were really good things, and then of course spreadsheets and software libraries and so on. So I was taught, for example, as an undergraduate, how to calculate square roots with paper and pencil. This was, trust me, very tedious. I bet very few people in the world now know how to compute a square root with paper and pencil, but we're not missing much. one button on the calculator, square root pops up, and that's good. On the other hand, it still is good if people can do mental arithmetic. One reason is because you don't always have a calculator or a spreadsheet or ChatGPT. And another is you have a deeper level of understanding of many things, both how calculators work. You can fact check to make sure that you haven't entered the wrong number into a calculator, and also just to understand how math works so that you might be the engineer who develops the next algorithm, and you have to understand this. So we're facing a parallel set of questions with generative AI. Namely, it can look up facts, it can often reason pretty well about facts, but with possible hallucination errors. And so it's essential both in education of kids and in keeping our own minds powerful enough to use AI, that we still know what fact leads to what fact, how claims are established, how peer review works, how logic works, and so on, so that we can use AI more effectively. If we retain those skills, then we can perhaps multiply the power of our own thinking by offloading some tasks to AI in the same way that we offload computing a square root to a calculator.
Yeah, completely agree. Well, Stephen, it has been awfully interesting. Thanks a lot for making up the time. I hope your publisher here manages to get you at some point to Portugal to present your book. That would
I
be
hope
great.
so. I love Portugal. I would love to return.
Have you been
I
here?
have, yes.
Well, I didn't know that. Okay, cool.
I've been to Lisbon. I've been to Porto. Yes.
Okay, great. So maybe then we'll meet you in person. Thanks a lot. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Este episódio teve a sonoplastia de Hugo Oliveira. Ouça e veja outros podcasts em expresso.pt e acompanhe-me em josemariapimentel.pt ou nas redes sociais. Até ao próximo episódio.